Great. All right. So hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our live panel discussion on blockchain beyond the hype, what HR leaders need to know. Personally, I'm really excited about today's session, and judging by the interest that we've had leading up to the event, it wasn't just me. We have a great discussion prepared for today with two panelists that probably know the space better than most. But before I hand it over to Anita and Matt for a quick intro, I just want to go over a few logistical items. So my name is Anna Maria Kroner, and I'll be hosting the conversation today. We're running the session as a panel discussion. We have a few questions prepared that came in over the last couple of weeks, but we invite everyone to contribute to the discussion. You can post your questions in the comments or let us know if you want to come off mute. Since we are expecting a full house today and to avoid any disruptions, we've muted everyone except for our panelists. So with me today is Kat LeBlanc from our team. Kat will be monitoring the chat and managing the virtual mic. So if you have any questions for our panelists or wish to engage with them directly, you can let Kat know and she'll unmute you. As you've noticed, we're also recording this meeting and we'll make the recording available on our YouTube channel in the next week. So we have quite a few questions prepared for today. So we structured the discussion into HR use cases first, followed by security concerns. But the second part could technically be a session on its own. So if we feel like we're running out of time, we'll definitely book a part 2 for the new year. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Anita and Matt for a quick intro.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Matt. I'm started work Axel about 5 years ago. We do enterprise workforce management. So we're in the HR tech space, and we're always looking to add new innovative components to HR tech in general. And to the WFM space, we have some blockchain components and some other innovative components that we're looking to leverage to really breathe a breath of fresh air into a space that tends to get innovations last sometimes, bottom of the totem pole. So excited to share some things that blockchain can do in this space.
Right, and my name is Anita Lettink. I have worked in the HR tech industry for the past 20 years. Currently, I am an independent, also a partner at Strategic Management Center in the Netherlands. And I try to help people with, on the one hand side, HR trends, on the other hand side, technology, and how they prepare themselves for the future work.
Great, thank you. So just to sort of set the foundation for today, I think it would be good for us just to clarify what blockchain is and what Web3 is, and are they related? How are they related, if at all?
Yeah, I can hop in there. So I guess before we dive into some of the meatier topics, understanding what blockchain is critical. We hear a lot of buzzwords on it. Sometimes it's riddled with fear, but let's just understand what it brings in terms of value. To better understand what blockchain is, sometimes we have to look backwards and understand why we moved off of pen and paper and onto databases. And then we can then understand why we're going to move off of traditional databases, or at least start migrating towards a different type of infrastructure that tends to be on chain. So if we look backwards, why did we move to databases? If you have a pen and paper, you're able to keep records of transactions on pen and paper. You're able to keep documents on pen and paper. You can have everything on pen and paper. There are a few problems though, things that databases were able to solve that pen and paper couldn't. When we're talking about speed of retrieval in a database, I can go and index information. I can quickly access it. If I need to go and save information, I can store a lot more information in a database. And in the event of something disastrous happening, I can go and recover that information as well. So recovery is better, indexing is a lot easier, and being able to store more information were kind of the benefits of using a database as opposed to traditional pen and paper. And when the database first came, this is more public perception, the idea was, well, why would I use that when I could just have all my documents on pen and paper? Transitioning that would take so long, and the opportunity cost of transitioning, it's not worth it. But now, here we are, not that many years later, maybe a couple of decades to 20 years. And if you're a company that's doing everything manually, you can't operate at the same speed or efficiency as a company that makes use or leverages database technologies. Now, there's still an issue with database technologies. What are the issues? Some of the ones that we know of are in the event of a disastrous event happening. If your backups are infected, there could be a problem there. Databases rely on centralized security, meaning an organization needs to have its security protocols in place, its own certifications, has to invest in security to make sure that that data is safe. And on top of that, in the event of some audit that needs to happen, or when we talk about data integrity, it's very easy to falsify information, whether it's on a database or a piece of paper. An admin for a database can go in and change that information, or a piece of paper, someone could scrap it, hide it, and make a new one. Whereas on blockchain, the information, and this is a key concept, is immutable. And another term, trustless. When we say something is trustless, it means we don't rely on trust in an organization or in an individual. We just know that it's there, it's immutable, and we can use that data in a way that if it's timestamped at a certain time, we know it'll never change. So transitioning from pen and paper to databases was a great step in being able to retrieve information, data security, and I guess storage of information. Now, when we go to blockchain, we have all that plus. Redundancy is infinite. You have as many copies as needed. The state is stored, and you can use that for auditability purposes. And as we get further into blockchain innovation, it may not be the case now, much like how with databases in the early days, you can store much, but now we could store a massive amount. With blockchain, we're seeing in the space that there's more and more innovation in being able to index information quicker, store more information, retrieve information, actually do more with that information, no different than what we saw when databases came into play. So we're going to be moving or transitioning towards this type of architecture for those reasons. And it's not so much of a maybe we will, maybe we won't. We are heading in that direction, and being ahead of the curve and understanding why and how that's going to impact our day-to-day lives, whether it's in HR tech or your own personal lives, is pretty important. That covers blockchain. Now, the next phase is Web3. What is Web3? Web3 isn't something new. It's not something that's appearing out of nowhere. It's just an evolution, the next evolution in the web, no different than how blockchain is the next evolution in data storage, data retrieval, and data use and data integrity. So if we look at the history of the web, Web 1 was heavily focused on consumption. Web 1 in the early days is something that focused on data retrieval. People could publish information online, and in publishing information online, all that information people can go and retrieve. But Web 2 was about contribution. We moved towards companies like Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp. Not only could we go and consume information, we can actually participate and create information. So when we talk about Web 1 transitioning to Web 2, Web 1 was the era of writing. Web 2 was the era of writing and reading. It was both. And then Web 3 is now about ownership. Web 3 focuses on ownership of data, of assets, of my own personal information. So if I'm interacting with a business in Web 3, the concept is I don't need to give them all my information. In HR, a common problem, we saw this issue with Equifax, is that when you sign up for something like this, you're giving away all your information to this company that now has to manage it in a centralized fashion. You then go to the bank, you do that exact same process. They now manage your data. You do that with every single institution, and they are using your data, and you're relying on their security, their database security, to be able to have that. And we now know that there are a lot of hacks that happen, a lot of sensitive information is exposed because we're relying on centralized orders. Web 3 enables ownership of information so that you can have the ownership and the decision power to either reject information giving, you can hold your own information, you can make information visible. And without diving too much into the details, Web 3 is a natural progression of Web 2, and it's about 100 times the total addressable market of Web 2, and Web 2 was about 10 times the addressable market of Web 1. So we're seeing exponential growth as the web evolves. And that's kind of what Web 2 or Web 3 is. If you guys have any questions, we can go over them later, but love to hop into some of the HR topics today.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Just one question on that note, Matt. One of the questions we received is, will the transition to Web 3 lead to Web 3 becoming bigger than Web 2, or will those two be able to coexist?
They'll coexist, no different than how Web 1 when it was migrating to Web 2, you had a lot of companies that were still operating in the Web 1 fashion. And then as Web 2 came to be, they slowly started phasing out products that weren't keeping up with the trends. You either get with the new way of working and be on top of how you can start performing tasks more efficiently, retrieving information more efficiently, having a more tight organization. If you're not keeping up with the trends, you'll be outpaced by organizations that do. So when we're talking about Web 3 coexisting with Web 2, we're going through a transitionary period. Some companies are still going to be using Web 2 methods. Newer innovative companies are going to start leveraging the new tech. And then over time, that new tech will allow for more efficient organizations, lower costs for implementations, just really all in all, better tech allows for better performing businesses, and it will be significantly bigger. The total addressable market that Web 1 captured in the day was about 1.8 billion. Then Web 2 captured 180 billion total TAM. And now we're looking at Web 3. Web 3 goes up into the $18 trillion total addressable market. And that's only for what we know now, because everything's going to be online. It's a large topic, but it will coexist in the sense that we're transitioning to it. So to move from one phase to another, it's not a cold turkey cut. We gradually go towards it, but the Web 3 total addressable market is 100 times bigger than what the Web 2 total addressable market was. Yeah.
Great. So now before we head into the HR question, so leading up to the session, we ran a LinkedIn poll. LinkedIn polls are in no way representative. I do want to clarify that, but I think it kind of gives a good understanding of where the audience that's following us work, Axel, where they currently stand. So the questions, one of the questions we asked, what are sort of the challenges or roadblocks that you as an HR leader currently face when you're looking to implement blockchain in your organization? I'd say not surprising, but the top response with almost 70% was lack of knowledge. Now, I hope that the session today kind of sets the grounds for that, and we can help with that. The number two, so followed by that, is security concerns. 50% actually have security concerns, and then about equal 8% was integration with existing tech and stakeholder buy-in. So I'm going to leave that here, and maybe you can kind of talk about that as we're going through the questions. So I think the main question for today, that's the topic of the conversation, is how can HR take advantage of blockchain, and what are some of the use cases that you actually see? And Anita, I want to pass this question on to you as the future of work leader, and then Matt, maybe you can add your context to that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Ana Maria. So two topics that Matt mentioned, I think, are critical for the HR space. On the one hand, it's trust. And it's critical that you trust your employer, that they will treat you right, but also that they will pay you on time and accurately. And on the other hand, that they will treat your data carefully, because during a lifetime, you will work for 5, maybe 10, maybe 15 companies, and all of these companies collect information about you and store it. And very often you don't know what they have, and you also don't know how long they hold on to it. In other words, you don't own it, they do, just like with banks and credit advisors, like Matt mentioned. So a couple of years ago, when blockchain first came to the market, a number of different use cases were tested almost. And so the first use case that everyone tried was payroll, because that is so much about trust, right? And it quickly became apparent that while you need to trust the data that goes into a payroll, and you need to trust the data that comes out of it, putting the payroll engine itself on the blockchain was simply not doable because of the huge numbers of calculations that goes on behind the scenes, right? If you have to wait for every calculation to be stored on a block, to be replicated, then running payroll at the end of the month for a large population simply takes too long. It wasn't feasible. So a number of companies tried that, but all have abandoned their pilots. simply because it won't work. What was interesting, however, that a part of payroll currently works very well on the blockchain, and that is cross-border payments. When people work in a different country from where their family lives and they want to send money home, that usually costs a lot of money, simply because money travels through the banks. They all impose a fee on that. And so when you send $100, for instance, your family could end up with 80 because of everything that's taken out. But also it will probably take 4 or 5 days as money travels through all those different banks. With blockchain, it's much easier because you put it in your wallet and your family can withdraw it from that same wallet. And that means that you completely take out the middleman and you now only deal with that company that provides you with cross-border payments. So there it did take on. And I think for companies that employ a lot of people that work outside of their home country, this is a really interesting use case for HR because ultimately it saves a lot of money. Then we started to look at, okay, how do we actually contract people? Because sometimes you can end up in a situation where there's a dispute between the employer and the employee about what you have delivered, and then someone will not paid or someone will not get paid, right? And that is where you start to see smart contracts appear. Now, I know a lot of people, when they hear the word smart contract, they immediately think of NFTs and Bored Apes and all of that. This is a different use case. A smart contract between an employer and a worker doesn't necessarily have to be an employee, simply states what does need to be delivered and how are we going to pay for that. And when all the criteria have been fulfilled, then an automatic payment follows. So when you are a freelancer and you don't have a whole organization behind you to keep track of invoices and make sure that you're actually being paid for work, a smart contract can be a really good use of your time. And I expect that over the coming years, we'll see much more people turn to smart contracts to help them with or to optimize the way that they sell their services. And now the last use case that I want to touch upon is the self-sovereign identity. And we talked about trust and we talked about data ownership. And one of the things that blockchain allows you to do is, I'm gonna paraphrase it a little bit, but let's say it's like a wallet, but then for personal information. So everything about you is stored in that wallet. Your personal, your home address, your security details, your bank number, your certifications, your diplomas, where you worked, how long you worked there, everything that relates to employment can be stored in there. And instead of your future employer taking all of that information, storing it in their systems and holding on to a copy of all of that, you will now provide them temporary access. So for the duration of your time spent with them, your employer will be able to access that information. But once you leave the company, you will cut off their access, provided, that is legal, of course. Sometimes they have to hold on to it for a while longer. And so that means that you are much more in control of your data and who has access to that data. And ultimately, it means that you own that data. And I think that is an important characteristic also of Web3, where it's much more about you are in control of your data, of what is known about you, where in the past, all your data, well, you don't even know anymore where it's stored and who does what with it.
And Anita, I think that plays into trends we're seeing for compliance in different regions. If we look at GDPR compliance, the ability for a user to wipe their information from a company database is something that's mandated to be compliant with GDPR. Mm-hmm. If we're looking at something like SSI, SSI being a natural evolution of SSO, I can just reject the ability for a company to have my information, and then it would be tied in with the system that would then go clean that. And it makes sense to see GDPR compliant systems have that in place. There are also some ISO standards that have come out for blockchain. Specifically, if anyone's interested, TC 307 focuses on all blockchain compliance standards. And one of those things is making sure that your self-sovereign identity is able to interact with the chain of whatever provider is using. So if I don't want my information, as Anita was saying, I can simply go into my wallet, reject access from this organization, and now they'll have the information that I'd given them at some point in time. But for all my current live information on myself, they no longer have access to that. So we're seeing not only a shift with blockchain, with the technological side, but the compliance side is really stepping in as well to make sure we're all moving in the same direction. Because again, this isn't an uncertainty. There's a certainty that we're moving towards this type of world where everything's going to be on chain, because it's a clear benefit and clear optimizations from what we're doing now. It's a interesting space, and I do think if we look at what Anita was saying as well before, where you have instant settlement. Instant settlement is one of the biggest benefits of blockchain technology for financial services, for HR, for anything. Because if we look at how databases work, I'm touching a bit on the technical side, but I think just a high level concept on why blockchain is great here. When we use a database to send information from one system to another, whether it's HR or financial services, we're sending a post-it note. One company is sending a post-it note to another saying, move this data here, or move X number of dollars to this client. Then it takes 45 days on average for institutions, all institutions involved, sending institution, receiving institution, and all intermediary institutions to settle transactions. It takes an average of 45 days. All their accounts receivable, accounts payable, everyone's transacting on their own ledger. It takes a lot of time. Instantaneous settlement is one of the benefits of blockchain. And the easiest thing to compare it to is how before, if we all wanted to collaborate on a Microsoft Word document, we'd all have to download the Microsoft Word document. We'd all make our changes, local changes, and then try to upload it. And there would be a bunch of conflicting changes. It'd be a headache. But now, what do? We hop on Teams, we hop on Google, and there's a collaborative place to work where I could be working with other people at the same time. We could see our changes. All of our changes are logged. And if ever we want to go and revert back to an old version, there's a version control directly in this. So not only is it more collaborative, but the history of changes are all saved with timestamps. And that right there is instantaneous settlement, where you're typing, it happens. Someone else is typing, it happens. Better version control and restoration, since you have all the versions of backups. And for auditability purposes, if someone did something at some point in time, you can go see who made that change. So oftentimes, if we look at something like Microsoft Word online now, or Teams online, that was kind of the transitionary phase from Web 2 tech, slowly moving towards the principles of Web 3. So I think that's a great example. And Anita, what you said before, if you want to send money, you're actually sending money online, as opposed to sending a note to a bank that needs to go speak to an intermediary bank, send a note to the receiving bank. It's all instantaneous, and it's so cool. And if you want to cut their access off, you have the choice as the individual to say, I'm rejecting access to funds for this institution. Yeah. Or for HR, removing access to my data. Yeah.
And Matt, I think one of the use cases that we've been seeing is companies actually moving their loyalty programs onto blockchain and tokenizing that. I know there's been a couple of examples recently with Starbucks or PayPal. So maybe you can talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, if we look at, I think an easy case to go after with blockchain, one that's non-invasive and something that won't disrupt critical sectors, because in reality, when you're bringing in a new tech like this, especially when there's you hear a lot about it in the mainstream, some positive, some negative. It could instill fear in ushering in new technologies into these organizations. So what are we seeing? We're seeing a trend of organizations leveraging blockchain for non-critical solutions. And it's kind of the first step to proving out that this technology can work for large enterprise and is something that they can adopt with ease. Starbucks recently launched their NFT program or loyalty program using Polygon. It's one of these chains on Ethereum. It allows people to now redeem rewards and have them on their NFT. For anyone who has the Starbucks app, the way it worked, the Web2 way, is I have my app. I've logged in with my username and password, so they have that information. I can buy things, and then I get reward points. These points aren't real. They're imaginary points. They exist in a database, and when I go and give them to get a free drink or something, I can have it. Whereas if you use NFTs, you can now track everything that you go and purchase. It's a lot more engaging for the end users because now they can actually earn things that are real and not just imaginary stars, because it's not cool. You go to a friend and you say, hey, I have 1,000 Starbucks stars. They go, oh, cool, like whatever. Whereas if you actually have proof that you've attended for X amount of times, you bought X amount of drinks, you've earned X amount of rewards, and they're tied directly to who you are in your wallet. And then you can then go take that information and then show, this is if we're going further, Starbucks will likely have tied rewards programs with other organizations. So now if I've spent X amount at Starbucks and I can reliably prove that I am the person that spent this much at Starbucks, we're talking about auditability here. If there's proof that I've spent this much at Starbucks, I can go to one of their partners and show, hey, authenticate. I am the owner of this token. I'm the owner of this data. I've met the minimum requirements of spending X amount at your partner. I am now eligible for some sort of benefit at this other organization. It's non-invasive. It's a fun way to introduce the concept of NFTs into the public. And we're going to see this more and more. Salesforce has plans of doing it for their sales team, where depending on how much they sell, they're going to be earning NFTs and different badges. And for some of you who've worked or are working in larger organizations, I know there are always these badge programs and rewards. I'd worked at IBM back in the day, and it gets to a point where you get something called certification dilution or exhaust, where everyone has every badge and it doesn't really mean anything at the end of the day. Whereas if those badges are just piled up onto who you are as a token and they follow you, you can now go and apply somewhere else and say, hey, I have these badges, I have these certifications. You don't even have to look at my CV. I don't even have to send it to you. This is who I am. This is all the stuff I've done. And it just removes a lot of the information distribution that could be inaccurate or inaccurate. It's not really valid, and blockchain helps with a lot of that. So a lot of really interesting use cases.
So now we have to wonder when LinkedIn will switch to blockchain, right?
They're already incorporating. They're incorporating the use of NFTs on LinkedIn, Instagram, Reddit, and Twitter have already done it. But the evolution. This is another interesting thing that we're seeing. The evolution of NFTs is that not only does it hold your information, but you can actually use an NFT as your profile picture to validate or show that you own that specific asset. It's not something that would apply too much to business at the moment, but it does show that you're a bit more forward thinking and that you're implementing things that other organizations aren't really thinking of.
I was thinking from an HR perspective, there is actually a use case that I could see at the moment with NFTs when companies start to work with designers, for instance.
Yeah.
Because let's say if you're a famous designer and now you have a contract with a company and then they use your design and they stop using it, but maybe in 3 or 4 years, they will reuse it and you will not get any additional money simply because they bought your design. Now, you as a designer, you could potentially put yourself in a much stronger position where you say, look, I'm going to work for you. Here's my design. I sell it to you as an NFT and you can use it, but for this time. And if you want to reuse it in 2 or 3 years, that is perfectly okay. But that also means that I get paid X, right? And that supersedes the current contract that we have. And those are things that you can stipulate in NFTs. And that is also a reason why I think that HR needs to be prepared for this, because there will come a day, and I don't think that is long off, where people from sales and marketing will come knocking at your door and say, we want to work with this designer, but they tell us they want to sell it to us, their services to us, but only as an NFT. Now, what are we going to do? And then you better have an answer, because if that is the moment that you start thinking about it, it is too late.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing. In NFT specifications, you can have what Anita's referring to, royalties defined. So you could say anytime someone uses it or views this, you get X amount in royalties if it's something that's transactional. Another interesting case, which I think is going to touch HR, but really business individuals in general, business leaders, is a perfect example. You create a blog post. You create a blog post, you get a lot of views. It's done really great. And then you do that 5, 6, 10 times. It's hard to really quantify in one place who you are. It's hard for readers to contribute to what you've done, because oftentimes you're posting on a certain website, on your blog, and it's hard to have that trace of ownership. Where if we look at the new way of doing things, like Medium is a great place to post articles. That's a good place, or you post blogs on LinkedIn. But what we're seeing is with NFTs and with other tokenized solutions, I posted a link to a website called mirror.xyz in the chat. Mirror is a place where people can publish their content. The account, when you sign up as a publisher or as a viewer, you link your token, so your NFT, who you are, with a wallet address. And if people want to contribute to you or think you've done a good job, they can either send you a transaction, a donation, or if they've just viewed your content, all the views and all the interactions on your content are going to now be fed directly into your personal profile. So now you can reliably prove to an organization, and let's say you switch companies, or to your own organization, I've generated with reliable proof, this has not been tampered with, this number of views on my articles. I can produce high value content and I can reliably prove it. And there's no contesting it because it can't be modified. It's immutable and it's trustless. So we're seeing a trend towards all this type of thing where everything you do can be captured on your own individual profile.
And we have one question that I would like to ask now, since we're on the topic of NFT, which is, would HR software also be sellable as NFT? In NFT, stipulate which functionality for how many employees for which time frame company can use the software.
Where is it? HR software sellable as an NFT? So this wouldn't be an NFT. This would be a case of a smart contract. When we're talking about a smart contract, the way to think about it is it's a vending machine. A vending machine is the most primitive form of a smart contract that we see offline, where you have predetermined criteria, inputs with predetermined outputs. If you put in, let's say a bag of chips is worth $1. If you put in $1.50, you'll get your bag of chips and 50 cents back. If you put in 50 cents and you select the bag of chips, nothing will happen. You'll get your money back. Predefined inputs will lead to predefined outputs. When we look at smart contracts, the only reason why we call them smart as opposed to typical contracts is because typical contracts, you're relying on a broker or a third party to either mediate it, enforce it, and hold that information. Whereas when we're talking about a smart contract, it's something that's on chain, and you'll oftentimes hear the line, or you may hear more frequently in the next few years, code is law. And this is extremely important. I'll talk about a paradigm shift that we've seen recently, but for this case, where if you're selling HR software to a company, and instead of having a traditional model now where, let's say you're selling down market, you go online and it says, enter your credit card and you get a year's subscription at X amount of dollars. That would be a smart contract. Instead of right now, you go through Stripe then authenticates it. There's an admin dashboard. It's just, if you put in this amount, you will be granted irrevocable access for the period of time that you paid. And when Anita's referring to being able to have expedited processes, smaller teams being able to do more, is because smart contracts can abstract the need for people to be overseeing these different systems and managing them, because you baked in the terms of your smart contract. And if someone chooses to interact with it, they're acknowledging the terms of that smart contract and you're both satisfied with it. It's a trustless intermediary that really removes any sort of middleman. A paradigm shift that I think is interesting and why we see smart contracts being the future is recently we've heard a lot about, maybe some of us have, some of us haven't, but there have been a lot of collapses in certain crypto companies at the moment. Certain crypto companies were either misallocating funds or they are getting into some hot water with fund allocation and they were doing some things they shouldn't have. When they went under, creditors were seeking, creditors in the organizations were seeking some of the money back. Traditionally, you would pay out the highest level of the creditor first, whether it's the bank, an investor. But who did we see get paid out first in every single scenario without question? Smart contracts that were there for loans or smart contracts that were there for investment. Those smart contracts were paid back immediately first because you can't negotiate with it. You can't sit down and talk about it or delay it. It holds your funds if you don't meet the criteria. And if you do meet the criteria, it'll unlock it. It's black or white. And now we saw that highest level creditors were actually paid second to smart contracts because it was trustless. And that there is a really interesting indicator that if that's the case for financial systems, it will be absolutely the case for HR systems where smart contracts will lead the charge in everything. If I have an insurance claim I want to make, I won't have to go and take a picture and send it to my insurance broker. The insurance broker has someone sitting down at a desk evaluating if it's real. Then they make a claim. It then goes to another department and they have to send it back to you. And it takes 5 to 15 business days. If you meet the parameters of a smart contract, you post a picture, the picture has the clear information, your name, the time, you can combine it with elements of computer vision and other innovations that have come. If you meet the criteria of that smart contract, you will be instantaneously settled. The amount will come to your account, they'll immediately receive the claim, and then you can even have another smart contract automating where that claim goes. So you're really going to have a lot of innovation happening in the next few years for these spaces, or at least they'll be more visible in the public realm. Yeah.
So I think I do want to get the conversation going, just because we have 18 minutes left. So one of the questions we've also received is, how can we make blockchain more accessible to HR? Anita, I think that's a good question for you since you're working so much with HR leaders.
Yeah, and what I try to do is make sure that people understand technology. I think traditionally what we have seen is that HR leaders cared about people, about making sure that everyone was working in a healthy and safe way, that people were paid on time, but maybe did not take so much time to think through technology that was far removed from their daily business. The pandemic changed that because suddenly they had to use and apply all that technology to make sure that people were able to work from home, that they were protected in the right way, but also that they were supported through technology. And we have seen that because over the past 2 or 3 years, both the investments from companies in solutions increased exponentially, but the HR tech investments from investors also was 3 or 4 times as high as it was before. So suddenly you have this complete turnaround of, yeah, we're only interested in what a solution can do for us, and to, oh wait, no, now we need to understand if we are choosing the solutions that will also help us through the next 5 to 10 years. And that means that people are suddenly trying to understand the foundation or the fundamentals underneath all those solutions. AI, for instance, artificial intelligence and machine learning play a big role in that. But those, I think, are already present in some of the solutions that they use, and they might be a little bit easier to understand simply because there's so much of a functional component to them. And people are more familiar with them. And now over the past year or so, we've seen this tremendous influx of all kinds of articles and solutions and companies focusing on the metaverse and Web3. And suddenly people realize that, hey, but that is a different foundation that is based on blockchain. And we don't really understand what that means. And we think it's very complex. And so part of my job today and also into the next year is really to help people understand, what does this mean? And even if you don't have a lot of technology in your background, what are the fundamentals? Explained in almost a functional way, because most of the companies that I work with have CTOs and CIOs, and they can take care of that. But as an HR leader, you have to understand at least some basic principles of the technology side of blockchain, because otherwise you won't be able to understand why you need to adopt it. And I think that, for instance, the Starbucks program that Matt just talked about is a really good example of introducing this to the masses in a way that is playful, that is easy, and that people will be faced with maybe once a week or every day. I don't know how often people visit Starbucks, but the more that people get exposed to this, the more normal it becomes and the better they understand it. So using this and getting familiar with it, I think is critical. But we need a little bit more at the moment than just the Starbucks rewards program.
Yeah, and so we ran a second poll on LinkedIn, and again, disclaimers, it's in no way representative. It might represent the Work Excel followers or Work Excel audience. But the other question we ask is, when do you estimate that your organization will implement blockchain technology? And I was really surprised to see the results, but 40%, around 40% said in 0 to 2 years. 21% said that they're either already using blockchain, or the other option was that they're looking to implement within the next 2 to 5 years. So what do you make of those results?
So I think, first of all, we know the big public blockchains, right? Everyone knows a little bit about Bitcoin, maybe about Ether, but there are so many more blockchains that are private to companies. When I talked about the payroll exercises or pilots that we were running them on a private blockchain that no one would know anything about. And so I think that a lot of companies are experimenting with some sort of blockchain pilot internally, not externally. I also see a lot of companies that are setting up Web3 and metaverse teams. So undoubtedly they are piloting with blockchain. And there are a number of very large companies that have set up blockchain in the past in their supply chain. And you know, to keep track of where products come from and how they travel through the process from origin to consumer, basically. That is all a little bit under the radar, and not a lot of articles are written about it. But I think there's much more going on than the average audience member would know. What do you think, Matt?
Yeah, I think, and this is where the interesting thing is, we hear about public chains almost all the time, to the point that the average person would think that blockchain and crypto is just, it's for fun. I hear someone doing it. It's not a real use case for businesses. The reality is that 95% of use cases are in enterprise, and most enterprises have already, we're talking about large organizations, all banks, wholesale banks, central banks, they're all moving towards blockchain tech. When we're looking at big companies, they invest in blockchain consulting firms to go and help them move in the direction of implementing blockchain. But this is already happening, and it's already been happening for a few years. The stuff we hear about in the public sector is just far more sensational. A lot of money being lost, a lot of money being made, monkey pictures being worth millions of dollars. It's a lot more fun to the average person. But the reality is that this tech is being used everywhere right now. And if you look at Google, Amazon, Facebook, LinkedIn, all major tech companies have already been years in implementing blockchain tech to their stack. And maybe after this, I'll have Anna send over a little visual documentation showing all the companies in the S&P 500 that are using blockchain, what technology they're using in blockchain, but most of them are behind the scenes solutions. We're talking about things that the Linux Foundation operates, really the company that helps all of our computers run. They have solutions, Hyperledger Fabric, Cactus, these things that we don't hear about, but they're used by organizations. And the supply chain example that Anita gave is a beautiful one. Traditionally, every member in a supply chain, let's say you have a supply chain with 10 people in it, or 10 organizations, 10 components. Each organization has to keep track of the price of a unit, what they sent it at, how many units they sent, and they keep track of it each in their own accounting and ledgers. And then they'll then communicate with each client one by one. This is similar to the case of Microsoft Word on your local device. Whereas if you have it all on chain, there are certain blockchains that really focus on supply chain. VChain, Morpheus Network, these are companies that integrate with solutions like SAP, Oracle, and they'll take the supply chain information and it'll all be in a single place so that any member of that supply chain can see the price in real time, who sent what where, and any member in that chain can go and validate the information on chain. And if you need to have access levels on there too, much like how an organization hops into a solution, they need different access levels. It's not just anyone could see anything like on Bitcoin, Ethereum. You need to have something called a permissioned chain. These chains that are used for organizations are permissioned. These two people in the supply chain are able to see this information. These organizations in the supply chain can see this. And how do you identify who's who? No different than what we said at the beginning. We're coming full circle. You have an identity on chain, and based off your identity, you are granted access rights to certain pieces of information. You're granted, let's say you have page views on a blog that goes onto who you are. So the information that you have control over or you're granted, it's two-way. You can give information to an organization can grant you access to their information, and they can control, same way you can control, or who has access and if you decide to revoke it. So it's a lot more control than what we have now, where you're just shipping it off and hoping for the best. And then if it doesn't work, then we're at the mercy of the organization's security.
Yeah, which reminds me of one more recommendation to HR. Go talk to your colleagues. Because if you ask around, if you work in a larger organization, I'm pretty sure that someone somewhere is working on blockchain, or you already have an enterprise blockchain running and you don't know about it. So go talk to your colleagues and see what you can find out about blockchain there.
Yeah, and one thing that I think is interesting is that we're talking about blockchain today in the sense that it's technology that will come in the future, but it's not something that's going to be known by everyone, since a good blockchain solution should be completely abstracted. The same way we don't go on Facebook today or any solution and go, you're not buying a solution saying, oh, well, this is great because the database is using Postgres or something else. You don't care. It has to be efficient. You have to trust it. The solution has to be quick. And all those things are why we're going to be moving towards blockchain. So a good blockchain solution, you shouldn't even realize you're using blockchain. The same way a good Web 2 solution now, you don't even need to know the underlying stack. As an end user, you just hop on, it's easy to use, and then you log off and you're done. The only difference is that now you get better control of your information. That's why when we say ownership of information, that's the next evolution of the web.
Thank you. So we have a ton of questions around security. So I'm going to propose that we're doing a follow-up in the new year to dive deeper into that subject. And just so everyone knows, we're taking note of all of the questions. So if we're not asking them today, we'll ask them next time. But I do want to take time to at least focus on two questions that we just got. So the first one, Anita, I think that's a great question for you, is would blockchain be viable in payroll compliance? I know you touched on that earlier, but I want to repeat your response. Yeah.
It would. When we ran our payroll pilots, this was actually the area where we thought a use case with blockchain would make a lot of sense. Because when you start to talk about payroll compliance, it's the things that you need to do to show to others that when you make a change, that change, you're authorized to make it. And so you need to have a ledger of who does what and when they do it, and also what are the contents of that change. If you can store that on a ledger, and then later on when you're being audited or when someone has a question, you can just refer them to the blocks and say, okay, go check the contents of the chain. That will make everyone's life a lot easier. So that payroll compliance is an excellent use case for blockchain.
And to tie into that, since WFM feeds into payroll most of the time, that when we're talking about retro payments or retro changes to time cards, or even time evaluation, if you have to go make a change on someone's time card 6 months ago, a lot of existing solutions have difficulty because when you're writing information to a database, you're either overwriting or you're storing lots of info on chain. If you need to make a retro change, you have the timestamp of every single transaction, every single punch in, punch out, time worked. And if you make a modification, you're not overwriting. You're just linking, saying there's been a modification to this, rerun all the information that's existed up until then, and you have everything timestamped on chain. So not only is there better compliance on the payroll side, but there's better compliance on the time collection, time evaluation side. And then if we go backwards even more, there's better compliance on the HRIS or the HRMS, leading to an HR tech stack where compliance is baked in on the protocol level, as opposed to hoping that your provider is meeting compliance needs. So we're not relying the same way we don't want to rely on a company's individual security team. We don't want to rely on companies trying to manage compliance individually. This should all happen on the protocol level. Security and compliance are going to be de facto better when we're on chain because everyone's using the same base layer. Applications can focus on business logic, not on administrative or security logic.
Great. Just one question. I know it's a loaded question, so I'm hoping you can keep your response to a minute. But another question that just came in is, how can blockchain help InfoSec? Because a lot of organizations would never consider blockchain because of the potential impact. Again, we're doing a follow-up on security, but maybe you can just touch on that quickly.
Yeah. So blockchain for info security is actually the best option. It just comes down to, you should have a permission chain, and if you want it to be private, you can as well. But for the reasons we kind of described earlier, if you have a traditional database, you're in charge of managing your own backups. You have to make sure that you have good redundancy, disaster recovery. You have to have good people on hand who are making sure you're always compliant with security policies. You're relying a lot on people and systems to then handle that security. It's called a fat application and a thin protocol. Whereas we're seeing a paradigm shift to having a fat protocol and thin applications, where fat meaning the protocol handles security, redundancy, disaster recovery, immutability, and the application can now be a lot thinner. Applications for Web3 are much cheaper to build because you only focus on business logic, whereas traditional Web2 companies are a lot more expensive since you need to have the business logic, the security, the certificates. We're handling that, and the shift is now changing. Thicker protocol that everyone leverages, and now we can focus on business logic, which is what we're best at as humans or business leaders trying to solve problems.
Thank you, Matt. So to close off the session, the last question is, where is HR headed? What should HR do next? Give us a call to action after all of the content that we just absorbed.
Yeah, so my call to action to HR people is go and be best friends with your CTO, because you will need that person as you embark on a journey to the future of work, especially because what I always tell my audience is the decisions that you make today will affect your current workforce somewhat, but they will mostly affect your workforce in 2 to 3 to 5 years. And so it's critical that you know what you're doing and that the things that you decide on will be good for your people in 3 to 5 years. And that is why it is so critical to get a better handle on technology, because that will shape a lot of what we will do.
Yeah. And I think on the that's probably the best advice, Anita. I think that's a winner suggestion. I think the only other thing I would maybe suggest is you could start many pilot projects for very low cost. Implementing blockchain isn't like you need to buy some expensive service, some big company. It's very low cost to test out what it's like to write information, not only to your database, but to a chain that you can spin up very quickly using a bunch of different services available. Costs you nothing. And you could take information that already exists in the database and just write it there. The word for it is a digital twin. So you can suggest or investigate what a digital twin pilot would look like, where you take some information that you're already saving, write it on chain, and then it'd be a good little internal pilot you can run with one person who's running this.
Thank you. All right, so I think we're at the top of the hour, so I'm going to close the session. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Matt and Anita, for joining us. I'm going to be in touch with everyone and send out information on the part 2. I'm glad that we got so many questions, so it's a good problem to have. Happy holidays, everyone, and guess we'll see you next year.
Thanks a lot for your attention, everyone. Appreciate it. Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.